Good evening, everybody. I am Travis Pipes. Sitting alongside me is my co-host, Dave Mogensen. Dave, welcome back to the program. It's great to have you on board tonight. We are going to be talking with you about social justice, football, and inspiring change. Pretty sensitive topics. Dave, 3 or 4 months ago, 5 months ago, do you think we would be having some of the open conversations that we've had around the community and different events that have sort of triggered this national response as it applies to sports?
I think with the way sports have kind of taken a back seat due to the COVID-19 stuff, and there hasn't been live sports, there hasn't been much to talk about, and then obviously the George Floyd thing happened, and we're just back into the same circle that we've seen time and time again, especially recently in the last 5 to 7 years with the proliferation of cell phones and video on your cell phones. It's not like these things just started happening now; they're just happen to be caught on video now. So we've obviously reached a tipping point where people are done with it, and enough is enough, and now those conversations are being had with everybody has social media accounts, everybody has access to see everything and have an opinion on everything, and that doesn't fall anything less for national sports organizations and things along those lines as well.
Yeah, there definitely seems to be a little bit of a tendency now to sort of join the movement, if you will. I think it's definitely important, to have some candid conversations about how this is going to be affecting the world of football as it applies to, both the NFL and all the way down to the prep level. Let's start off with Kyle Shanahan, who we know to be the coach of the San Francisco 49ers. He gave a real candid interview a couple of weeks back with Mike Florio of Pro Football Talk and said that he, quote unquote, couldn't believe that there are only 4 minority head coaches in the NFL and 2 minority general managers. At this point in time, I obviously flat out have to agree with that. I think it's not necessarily about the talent evaluation and abilities. How spot on is Kyle Shanahan in his assessment of the current state of leadership in the NFL?
I think Kyle Shanahan is 100% spot on, right? I think as you hear about Kyle Shanahan and as you hear about people who love to play for Kyle Shanahan, every stop he's been at, people who played for him have loved to play for him. And it doesn't just because he puts them in really good situations for success scheme-wise, right? It's because he understands the world's as it is or as it should be. He understands that he's in a position that he's in, not necessarily just because he's been really good at the X's and O's, right? So when you look at the landscape of the NFL, it's overwhelmingly dominated from a player aspect, from minority players, right? And that we've done, NFL's done different things, and they just aren't seeing that same level of domination or percentage-wise occupation with head coaches, coordinators, general managers, vice presidents, presidents of operation, and things along those lines, and even all the way up to ownership, right? Other major sports do have some minority ownership, and the NFL is just not there yet. And it's something that has been talked about over and over. NFL was already talking about maybe adding to the Rooney Rule before the George Floyd incident happened. So there was already some discussions happening there, whether those were merited or adding a draft pick for hiring a minority coach. At least they started the conversation that, hey, something has to change here from their aspect, right? There's no way, shape, or form that there should only be four minority coaches with Brian Flores, Anthony Lynn, Mike Tomlin, and Ron Rivera got a job back. So there's 4 of them. There's plenty of qualified candidates, and we'll get to that in a little bit later. But there's guys that have just been passed over that you wonder, why did somebody not hire this guy?
What do you do if you're, an NFL owner? And obviously, we talk a lot about the Packers on this show since they're our regional team. But what if you're a Dallas Cowboys, Jerry Jones, who kind of went through the motions in the hiring of Mike McCarthy, ironically, former Green Bay head football coach? How do you see sort of bringing in a guy like Marvin Jones, who used to coach the Cincinnati Bengals and had a pretty long tenure of success there, as sort of just another cog in the wheel, as it were, of opportunity? Is that kind of, 2 in the bird is good, like 1 in the hand? How do you look at that if you're from a leadership perspective in terms of equality in hiring?
Yeah, I think we've seen throughout the interpretation of the Rooney Rule, when an owner has his sights on a guy and he wants that guy, he's going to go get him. He's going to either do something to circumvent the Rooney Rule and check the box, or he's just going to go out and go after a guy. So obviously, with the whole Dallas situation, Jerry Jones wanted an established coach, a successful coach. He wanted Mike McCarthy, right? It almost felt like we knew he was talking to somebody because he kind of let Jason Garrett just kind of hang out there. We knew he was talking to somebody, and it almost felt like he wasn't ready to publicly say Jason Garrett's moving on until he knew Mike McCarthy was going to say yes, right? So
Right.
he brings Marvin Lewis down. Marvin Lewis is a friend of Jerry Jones. They probably went out to dinner. Who knows? They even talked about the head coaching position, but they were able to check off the box. Now that circumvents the Rooney Rule and what it's supposed to be about. All right. So I don't think if you add draft picks or you take away draft picks, if an owner feels like he has a guy he wants, he's going to go get him. And that no matter what kind of rules you put in place, no matter what kind of slaps on the wrist you give him for not doing the Rooney Rule or whatever you give him for hiring a minority coach, I don't think that's going to change the perspective of that small group of people who own NFL teams, and those we know those teams are worth billions upon billions of dollars. So unless you're ready to really put some major sanctions on somebody, a la an NCAA death penalty type sanctions for not following that rule, wholeheartedly, I don't think that the rule in any interpretation of the way it's written or even changes to it is going to make much of a difference.
Yeah, I would agree. I think it's kind of one of those things. You have opportunities as somebody in leadership and in the coaching ranks that has their sights set on a candidate. If you have tunnel vision in that sense, and I'm in no way condoning or saying that Jerry Jones had that perspective, but from an outsider's point of view, us as both fans and people that take in the sport on a regular basis, we see those types of transactional level things as a indicator of sort of the temperature, right, of what the opportunity is going to be for somebody that potentially might be a minority. Because I believe that there are candidates out there that are exceptionally qualified. We talk about Kansas City and Eric Bieniemy, who I'm shocked has not had an opportunity to be a head coach in this league, given the pedigree and the success that he's had with the Kansas City Chiefs. He won a Super Bowl, and the guy's name hasn't even been said since the pregame introductions, against the 49ers in the last game. So how do you feel about a situation like that with guys that are kind of waiting in the wings? The media has a way, right, of clarifying who the candidates are in those types of scenarios. And the enemy is a guy that, to me, it's shocking that he's just still sitting there as an offensive coordinator. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, Eric Bieniemy to me is like one of the biggest shockers that he hasn't gotten the job over the last 2 years for a few reasons, right? First of all, he's been the offensive coordinator of the Kansas City Chiefs throughout this first run of Patrick Mahomes, right? And Patrick Mahomes, generational talent, but doesn't mean that Patrick Mahomes is doing it all by himself. Somebody's coaching him up, somebody's training him and getting him ready to do all these things, right? And that's been Eric Bieniemy. Yes, Andy Reid is his head coach. Yes, Andy Reid's an offensive head coach who does have his hand in a lot of stuff and does call the plays on game day. But anybody who knows anything about football understands that Eric Bieniemy and Andy Reid are sitting there and putting this whole game plan together. They're sitting there talking to each other in the headset about what play to call. So the fact that Eric Bieniemy still doesn't have a head coaching job, to me, is somewhat baffling. I could not believe that he's got passed over. Okay, 2 years ago, maybe, okay, he wasn't quite ready. Winning Super Bowl, having all the pedigree he has, and knowing that the NFL is a total copycat league, right? 2 years ago it was can we get the Sean McVay clone, and all the Matt LaFleur gets hired and Zach Taylor gets hired, and nobody seems to want to go after the Andy Reid clones, even though Doug Peterson, Andy Reid guy, just won a Super Bowl a few years ago with the Philadelphia Eagles, and it has been highly successful. So there's already a standard there to show that Andy Reid people can be successful, which makes me really scratch my head and wonder why Eric Bieniemy is not getting an opportunity.
I'm going to go ahead and ask the difficult question since I'm the journalist here on the show. If Andy Reid was black, do you think Eric Bieniemy has a head coaching opportunity right now?
I don't know if that necessarily changes the dynamic, right? It's hard. That's a total hypothetical what if, but it just makes you scratch your head. It seems to me, I'm not in the room, right? I'm not in the room with the owners or the general managers or the presidents of football operations who are doing these interviews, but it seems from an outsider's perspective that Eric Bieniemy checks all the boxes, right? Mentored under a really highly successful head coach, ran very prolific offenses, has the respect of his players. Numerous of his players came out when he was interviewing for these jobs. It just seems like he checks every single box, and yet he hasn't gotten an opportunity. over the last 2 years.
Right. So, given the recent spate of events politically and socially in our world, I think it makes anybody scratch their head, as you've now said a few times, and go, something just isn't adding up here. At the end of the day, another guy we're gonna touch on is Jim Caldwell, former Detroit Lions and Indianapolis Colts head coach, who is from Beloit Memorial here in Southeast Wisconsin. What do you have to do if you're Jim Caldwell and you want to get back in the game? There's a lot of scenarios that have somebody that's had some success. Obviously, Detroit is not a hotbed of championship caliber football for a lot of reasons, but Jim Caldwell had some decent success during his time in Detroit. Do you think that there's more to the story in terms of his opportunities, being a head coach again?
Yeah, Jim Caldwell's another guy, right? If you look at Detroit Lions under Jim Caldwell, that was one of the most successful runs for the Lions, in the last 30 years, was that Jim Caldwell era where they made the playoffs. They were consistently finishing 9-7. Yes, they weren't getting over the hump and winning divisions, but they also play in one of the toughest divisions in the NFL. And the Packers have been really good. That was an era where the Bears were good. Minnesota was coming back in that era. So for them to finish 9-7 in those years was really good coaching. And you watched how they ran him out of town, and then he falls off the face of the earth. Detroit does with the new coach, and they go from 9-7 to where they finished 3-13 or something like that the next year. So
4-12 they finished since Jim Caldwell left town.
with Matt Patricia, and you look at Matt Patricia. Here's a guy comes off the Bill Belichick tree, which we have seen time and time again. Nearly every coach outside of Bill O'Brien, who you can still kind of go back and forth whether Bill O'Brien knows what the heck he's doing with Houston, has fallen flat in their face, from Mangini to Charlie Weiss to Romeo Crennel. All those guys have Josh McDaniels with Denver.
McDaniels in his stint in Oakland, right?
Flat on their face. And then here's another guy from the Bill Belichick tree, gets this opportunity over an Eric Bieniemy, over a George Edwards, replacing Jim Caldwell, right? And he's right now fitting the mold of the Bill Belichick guys falling flat in his face. And I think Detroit Lions fans would love to have the Jim Caldwell era back. As far as where does Jim Caldwell go from here? I know he was down with Brian Flores in Miami. He was the OC. He had some health problems. I think he's cured from those, but he's not going back to Miami. So Jim Caldwell's had a long NFL career. He's definitely a guy who's very capable of being a head coach. Really successful coach. Really good football guy. He is from here in southeastern Wisconsin, but to me, it's a point where Jim Caldwell might be the kind of guy that's probably not going to get that opportunity, but there's the Eric Bieniemys. I mentioned George Edwards, who's Minnesota's defensive coordinator. Deuce Staley's kind of high on that up-and-coming list. He's the assistant head coach for Philadelphia. Byron Leftwich is getting a lot of love with Tampa under Bruce Arians the last couple of years, too. So there's definitely minority guys out there who are ready to make that next step. I don't know if Jim Caldwell stays in that list just because of kind of where he's at with his age and where he's at. His career seems to be going the other direction. Well, there's guys whose career is on the rise that really should be considered in this next run. Next year, I'm sure that, as there always are, there'll be multiple NFL openings, and there's going to be highly qualified people of color that deserve an opportunity.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I love the Byron Leftwich and Deuce Staley reference. Those are both guys that are exceptionally qualified, and I think will definitely be head coaches sooner rather than later. We've talked a little bit about head coaching and coaching from an offensive and defensive coordinator position as a minority in the NFL. Dave, let's talk a little bit about players in the league, current and a former player. We see his name emblazoned across your chest there, Colin Kaepernick. I wrote a story back in the summer of 2016, right before he opted out of his final year in San Francisco and has not played in the NFL since. I think he should have been at least a backup in the NFL the last couple of seasons. Clearly hasn't had that opportunity. What are your thoughts on a player like him being signed now, especially with the shenanigans of his recent tryout that kind of flamed out and didn't go anywhere in Atlanta, back in early January and February after the season ended, and then we're also going to touch a little bit on Drew Brees and some of the commentary around current players. How out of touch are some of these players in evaluating and assessing the political landscape around us?
I think there's a lot of guys who are out of touch. May not be the right term, right? They just think what they think, and they don't understand the ramifications of what they think as it affects other people, right? So, Colin Kaepernick has been blackballed if you look at the guy's stats, here's the worst part about, to me, what's happened with Colin Kaepernick is he's been politicized, right? Colin Kaepernick did what he did. I was coaching college football at that time, and we had that conversation of in 2016, and said, hey, if you want to kneel, I get it, 100% understand it, and it's something that nobody really thought of, but it made a lot of sense, and people kind of don't know the whole story, or they refuse to understand the whole story, that Colin Kaepernick started by sitting on the bench. And it was a Green Beret, Nate Boyer, former ex-NFL player, who came and said, hey, instead of sitting down, let's kneel, because kneel is still gives the same semblance of not standing with your hand over your heart, but it's more respect than sitting on the bench. So people kind of overlooked that point. That didn't start with kneeling. It started with sitting down. And he progressed to kneeling out of respect for the military. You can pull up the quotes where Colin Kaepernick says he loves and respects the people who fought for the freedoms. That's exactly the same thing he's doing in another method, right? Is fighting for the freedoms through his kneeling. So, when somebody like Drew Brees comes out and says what he said, and some of the other people who say that it's him degrading the country and he's degrading the military, it means nothing. Another local Wisconsin guy, JJ Watt, just this last week on Twitter, mentioned it. If you still think that it's Colin Kaepernick, slapping the military, you do not understand what he's talking about, what he said, mostly because all you're doing is listening to the politicized nature of Colin Kaepernick. So it sounds like he might get signed. It sounds like the NFL is finally maybe ready to bring him on and sign him back, which to me is really exciting. I've been on the Colin Kaepernick train. The guy was a good quarterback. If you're a Packer fan and you tell me Colin Kaepernick sucks, you do not remember those playoff games when he took the 49ers and just destroyed the Packers in the playoffs, right?
Yeah. I lived in California, and I was at the first playoff game when he ran for 267 yards, and 2 touchdowns, and we ended up getting, destroyed in the divisional round. So I know all about how talented he is on the field. Politics aside, do you think there's room for the divisive social issues in an NFL locker room? And I think before we answer that, we need to think about a couple of things. One, I think it's easy for John Q fan to say, yeah, he has a certain perspective on things. It's not really that big of a deal. I think locker room chemistry and the other things that you sort of forge, you can speak to this being in a position of, of coaching and working and trying to mold different players into your system and believing in whatever the causes are within the locker room. How divisive can that situation really be? And is there really an opportunity for a guy like him? Football wise, he hasn't played in 4 seasons, so there's definitely probably going to be some rust. But I think athletically, he's young enough, and I think it'd be great if somebody gave him a chance to make the roster, in some capacity. But bar none, does he have an opportunity as a player on the field? Is he a guy that you'd want in your locker room?
Definitely is a guy you'd want in the locker room, right? So let's touch first on Colin Kaepernick coming back. He's 32 years old. I believe he's 32 years old, right? The thing that scares me is, I'd be excited for Colin Kaepernick to come back. The thing that scares me, he hasn't played in 3 years. He's going to come back. Maybe he's going to be a backup. He's not going to be a starter. Quarterback gets hurt in week 1, and Colin Kaepernick comes in, and he struggles because he's rusty. And everybody on the train's going to say, see, I told you he sucked. And that's in the back of my head, like, that might happen, and that's going to be terrible if it does. But there's an opportunity. Colin Kaepernick is better than nearly every single backup quarterback. He's better than numerous guys that started NFL games. Look at who the Steelers had last year starting games, and who Miami had starting games. And you look at Colin Kaepernick, you go, geez, that guy would. You watch NFL games and watch some of these guys. There's such a finite amount of guys that can be a successful NFL quarterback. It's insane. There's more people that can wire up rockets to send into space than there are who can play quarterback in the NFL. And I think to understand that you have a guy who's done it really successfully, who's just not getting opportunity, is so stupid from an NFL ownership perspective, right? So that fact is there. Colin Kaepernick can play. He should play. He's better than a lot of guys there, and his stats are out there. If you want to argue whatever you think, just look at his stats. Okay, he's got almost a 90 quarterback rating career. He's got over 2 to 1, almost 3 to 1 touchdown interception ratio. His stats are there, and he played on a couple of really brutal San Francisco teams his last 2 years. Chip Kelly came over there, Jim Tomsula, just really bad 49er teams, and he still was okay, right? So you look at that aspect. And the second part about that is the culture thing. When you get to the level of the NFL or any professional footballer, whether it's NFL, whether it's CFL, whether it's IFL or NAL in the indoor leagues and stuff like that, all the players on the team are really, really good. Yes, are some guys better than others? Sure, there's always going to be guys who are better than others. But in order to win, it's all those little things combined that make it. And locker room culture is a huge part of it. And that's something that winning teams have a culture instilled from the head coach down that allows them to win. There's a reason you see the same teams over and over and over and over. Some organizations lack that culture in their building, and that's something that sometimes comes from the ownership down. That's why some of these same teams really struggle until they get a very dynamic head coach or general manager, and that kind of change that culture. So if you're looking at how will Drew Brees' situation affects the Saints, we won't know till the season starts, because there's going to be guys who will say what they want to say right now on social media that move on and forgive and forget. They're going to be pissed off when they come in there, and that's going to be something that they have to talk through behind closed doors, and they have to make sure that this guy back here has their back at all times. And that's, I think, the unique part about football compared to NBA or Major League Baseball. Yes, you can get hurt in other sports, but NFL players are putting their body on the line every single snap of every practice, every game, right? They are putting their bodies on the line, and they need to understand that the guy next to them, the guy behind them, the guy in front of them has their back everywhere on and off the field. So if that culture is lacking in certain areas, you're going to see, no matter how good your players are, you're going to not have success in the field.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Steve from Madison wrote in while we were talking just now. One of the leadership minority head coaches that he always grew up watching was Tom Flores of the Oakland Raiders, the first Hispanic NFL head coach who won 2 Super Bowls. So it's interesting then when you think about it from that perspective, right, Dave, around how do we manage building the program from a scheme perspective, but incorporating personalities. And for a long time, the NFL has been known as sort of the no fun league, right? The NFL, they're very corporate. That this is the league that just a couple of seasons ago fined a player for wearing stuff that supported causes that they were very involved in off the field. Obviously, the cleats campaign has changed a lot of that. There's definitely, I think, a more appropriate level of, I wouldn't say activism necessarily, because it's still a business, right? But how important is this era right now for Roger Goodell, who's had a fair number of controversies as the commissioner of the NFL? How big is this for him in terms of the next step in the image of the league and where we're going with being in a place we can say, hey, the NFL kind of was at a turning point, right, with some of their issues that they faced over the last couple of seasons. And this was kind of the big one that they finally said, hey, we got our stuff together and now we're a little bit more of an inclusive environment. Do you see the organization and the level of management changing?
I think if you look at the climate, right, the George Floyd situation seems like it may be the enough is enough moment, right? Protests across the entire country, every single state, protests across the entire world. You look at the protesting done across the whole world. I think you've noticed, from a corporate perspective, that numerous and most large corporations and corporate entities, most of all the major sports leagues, have at minimum issued a statement condemning systemic racism and saying that they want to be part of what happens to fix that. Right now, saying it and doing it are two different things, right? What's going to happen? What are they going to do? How are they going to do that? Are all yet to be seen. But I definitely think 2020 has proven to be a year that's going to be kind of maybe its own semester-long course in high school as far as U.S. history, right? You're going to have this whole what happened in 2020, but this is a landmark moment that us growing up read about in history class of the 60s and the civil rights movement in the 60s, and this is just a continuation of that. And this is hopefully going to be a moment where we do see some change from legislation and things like that. So Roger Goodell, maybe he's finally believed it, or maybe he just wants to make sure that in the history books he's on the right side of history. Either way, I'm happy that he's made the comments he has. I'm happy the NFL has done what they've done. But again, it's a matter of let's see what companies, what the NFL does continually. what do those owners who really, Roger Goodell is just a mouthpiece for the 32 owners. So what are those guys going to do? Are they going to make a push to make sure their coaching staffs and front office are more conducive percentage-wise to the amount of minority players in the league, right? And do things along those lines. Are they going to help support organizations in their towns and in towns across the country for boys and girls clubs and urban communities and things along those lines? There's a million things they can do. You look at what Colin Kaepernick himself has done, pledging his own money. I know Michael Jordan. To shift to basketball, I know Michael Jordan has gotten a lot of flack for being apolitical during his career with the whole Last Dance thing, but he just pledged $100 million towards the community, towards building up the communities. I mean, if you look at where we're at, 2020, compared to where the Civil Rights Movement, the Civil Rights Act, 1968, we're just baby steps along in the freedom of Black Americans and minority Americans, right? So we're just taking these incremental steps, and there's so many things that have yet to be done. And the NFL as an entity that's really in everybody's household and on everybody's mind in the country can really be a strong proponent of helping push that change forward.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things the NFL has going for it as sort of the most powerful standalone brand. Here in the contiguous United States is this company, right, that has these things that need to change from a leadership perspective. I definitely would agree with that sense. How important then would you say is change in putting ourselves in a position where we can look back on this a year from now, 5 years? Because I personally don't think we're going to see enough of a shift in the immediate future. This is something I think that's going to be looked at generationally. What are we going to look at the NFL as sort of in this moment, since we're at this crossroads? And I'm not talking about just hiring coaches, who are minorities. I'm talking about being in a place where we can say the NFL really wholeheartedly believes in social issues that affect people, and then it's not just about selling advertising, or it's not just about selling, marketing opportunities or selling jerseys. There's needs to be something I think that they stand for on the shield that's right here on all those jerseys we see on Sunday and Monday afternoons. Where do you see change sort of fitting into the whole dynamic of what the NFL is going to do moving forward?
Yeah. Again, I totally agree with you. Right? It's not something that we're going to wake up, one day next week, and then wake up the next day and go, "Hey, they changed. They're for the better." Right? It's going to be piles upon piles of small things that they do. Where is the NFL donating money? What are they doing in that aspect? Are they consciously, Roger Goodell and the NFL? Roger Goodell can't just say, "Go out and hire Eric Bieniemy." Again, he's just that mouthpiece, right? What are the owners of the NFL going to do? Are they going to sit there and say, "Hey, we're a large brand. We're a $1 trillion, major conglomerate of American culture, right? American. If you think about American culture, you think about pro football. You think about the NFL. They have monopolized pro football. They profit immensely off of pro football. These are the people that can make real change in the country, right? As much as I want to try to make change, and I do everything I can with my power. I don't have the same power that a Jerry Jones does to make change in this country. So those 32 owners, with the reach the NFL has incremental amount of ability to make change. So as far as, again, making sure that the coaching staffs and the head coaches and GMs and president of football operations, guys get opportunities. People of color get opportunities in those roles and able to show themselves and start there. And then what are they going to do to give back to the community? What does the NFL do? Does the NFL get into, like a city like Milwaukee? Obviously, Green Bay doesn't have as large of an urban area as like Milwaukee does, but are they going to get in there? Are they going to work with the inner city areas? Where are they spending their money on? The NFL, famously or infamously took a ton of money from the United States military to kind of start this getting out for the national anthem thing a few years ago, right? But the NFL is taking so much money. What are they going to do to help support the communities and the areas and the people of color that really live and die and spend their money on tickets and making sure they have cable so they can watch the games and making sure their kids have the T-shirts and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I would agree with you. I think that's definitely, there needs to be more done along the lines of integrating not just the culture of leadership, ownership, and personnel and coaching, but in sort of creating a little bit a makeover of the brand, if you will, that I think is more inclusive than it traditionally has been, as advertised by some of the specific metrics involved with who's in a position of authority and who's not. So let's switch gears and talk a little bit now about the NCAA. I know there's a guy specifically we want to talk about, Mike Gundy. Dave, what is your perspective on the stand by his players at Oklahoma State and what he has sort of said to sort of be divisive around the lines of what we're currently going through socially?
Yeah, and I think when everything first started happening, right, took a couple of days for some people to really wrap their heads around it and then start making statements. And I think one of the biggest things that you didn't see, which really kind of irritated me and made me disappointed, was you have all these major college NCAA head coaches, football head coaches. Especially at public schools, are typically the highest paid public employee in the state. Uh, maybe second to the basketball coach of their same college, right? And you didn't see a lot of statements from guys supporting the movement, condemning what happened to George Floyd, and that to me was disappointing. And then you have, you kind of wrap that around. Some started coming in, and then you had, Mike Gundy. You didn't say anything. He just wore a T-shirt from a news station that's very far to one side, and some had a news station that has been condemning George Floyd himself and talking about his criminal history and all kinds of stuff like that. In addition to other, different political things, that it just seemed a bit distasteful to not only wear but being supportive of that for the movement of social justice. It's kind of working right now as we speak, right? So I think the one thing that irks a lot of people is you already have an issue, right, with large NCAA programs, kids coming there, not making any money, right, and the university's making millions and billions of dollars, and NCAA head coaches making millions of dollars a year on the backs of players, many players coming from poor communities, and yes, they're getting college paid for, right? I get that, and people are going to come out and say they get a free college, and not everybody gets that. I
Yeah, it's
understand
like
that.
saying you get free dental and free vision insurance, which is like the one that has the $1.98 premium when you get a new job.
Yeah, it
It's
just
kind of like
doesn't
a
match up
chew-in, like a throw-in benefit.
when you look at the numbers of what the major ones come in, right? And that's a whole other topic for paying college athletes, and the ones that the likeness stuff that's coming is great. But you're talking at guys who go into somebody's home, right? And they sit in front of their parents and they say, I'm going to take care of your son for the next 4 to 6 years, however long he's with me. And they make these promises to guys. I did it myself. And to me, that's something that's always in the back of your mind, right? Is you sat in somebody's living room and you said to their mother that I'm going to take care of your son, right? And to me, in this moment, that's part of taking care of their son, is saying, hey, I stand with you. I understand why you're frustrated. I understand the issue, and let me be a part of the help to make it better and change it. And I don't think you saw a lot of that from some of these major college head coaches. Doesn't mean that they don't feel that, but again, it's all about influence, and somebody like a Nick Saban could have come out after a couple of days, and hundreds of thousands, if not millions of more people are going to listen to what Nick Saban says than some guy on the internet or some
Yes,
some
exactly.
person. So I think that's something that's really kind of been frustrating, and maybe as it boiled over. Mike Gundy has a whole history of other issues that I think it's not just the fact that he wore this shirt. It seems like it's been a little bit of a systemic problem with him. We've seen some other, Clemson coming out. Iowa just fired their strength coach. So again, you're hearing about this possible boys club of white coaches who are just acting like idiots and acting derogatory and acting in a way that if it was my staff and I was the head coach and I knew of that, I'd fire the guy. I would just get rid of him. Some of the stuff, I don't want to repeat some of the stuff that players have come out and said, he said this to me, he said that to me. It's absolutely insane that some head coaches may have known this and, again, pushed it under the rug and swept it under the rug. I don't want to deal with it. I don't want the backlash nationally. Fire the dude. Get rid of him. That should not be part of your program.
Yeah, I think I 100% spot on. I, as you are pretty connected in the coaching and sort of sports writing world as they kind of intermingled, right? And I think we are past the era where you coach by intimidation. Let's talk a little bit then along those lines, right, Dave, of we've touched on culture, we've touched on some of the messaging, we've touched on the idea of change, from a professional standpoint. How important is it really for the NCAA to inject change into the culture of these programs? There's definitely, I think, been a little bit of a tendency for some of these bigger name programs to sweep some of that stuff under the rug, and we are kind of seeing it now. It's kind of similar to the Me Too movement, maybe not on the same scale, right? But there are guys, number of examples which you just mentioned, players on the coaching staff of Ohio State under Urban Meyer that were involved in some pretty sensitive stuff socially, and with some violence, etc. How does it work for you in terms of working with kids who are impressionable, both being a college football player and coming up in a little bit of a different era there at the beginning of the 2000s, and then having a chance to coach student athletes in college and inject sort of this whole perspective into your own program? What's the real issue at hand when you're in a position like you are, where you say to them, we are going to build our program a certain way, and it's not going to be around some of the stuff that we've thought that coaching really was, which is kind of basically passed us by and is a little more dated? Do you believe in that philosophy?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think, without a shadow of a doubt, that old school, disciplinary kind of style really is not seen many places. Maybe outside of the New England Patriots, you aren't going to see that style very much, right? So, I was lucky to play for a coaching staff in college that was as far from that as could possibly be. I played for Coach Dennis Miller and his whole staff. You didn't see that. You didn't see that, and he became. He was a highly successful college football coach, college Hall of Fame coach, and he's a guy that didn't at all anywhere way, shape, or form. Same thing in high school. I played for a great coach at high school. I mean, you know him as well, and Dean Wilson and that whole staff. You just didn't see that kind of stuff, right? But some guys came from different eras. I coach with guys who were in that kind of mentality of the screaming and the yelling and stuff like that, and the derogatory stuff, right? It doesn't mean you can't be hard on people and expect things out of people, but there is a whole level of understanding and getting out of it. And it's just kind of that 21st century understanding of how life works, right? It doesn't work really as much in a corporate boardroom as it did. I remember when I was young working in kitchens and having chefs throw things at you, right? It's not just a football issue. It's an issue that's really how authority was back in the day, and we've kind of moved past that. So I think from a perspective of coaching, myself playing for, high school and playing in college for two different sets of coaches that all had this kind of same ideals. For me, becoming a coach then, it was something that it just seemed normal to me to act like that. It wasn't the other way around. Now, again, we're talking about systemic racism and how that has an effect. If you're somebody who played in high school in my era for a coach like that, and maybe played in college for a coach like that, then you become a coach. Chances are you're probably going to take that same style. The same reason as if somebody, a white American who was born into a family who was very vocally racist, maybe married into another family who's very vocally racist, there's a good chance their kids are also going to have some of the same mentalities, right? So it's just really breaking the kinks in that chain as we can. And it's not something, like you said, it's going to happen overnight. It's going to be a generational thing. And I think if you look at where we're at right now, compared to where we were, in the 1960s, there has been progress made. Not nearly enough progress, right? But there's been progress made. So, from a coaching standpoint, again, even at a high school coaching level, at a college coaching level, and even when I coached, professionally in arena football, there's still some semblance of you're taking the son of somebody and you're taking care of him, right? In high school, obviously, he goes home to his parents every night. But when you start looking at the amount of time, even in high school, that you spend with your coaching staff, from workouts and film to practice, and you're talking year-round in games, that player is spending as much time with his team as he is with his family. So the coaches have an inherent responsibility to look out for that mother's son. In college, it's even more prevalent, right? Because you're going into their homes, and that's something that has kind of always stayed in my mind when I interact with players that I coached in college to this day, right? I have that in the back of my mind, like, hey, this guy, I sat there. I can see his mom still when I talk to him, or when he reaches out for a favor. I had an excellent opportunity last year to hire a former player of mine into a salaried manager position where I work, right? And that was awesome to me to say, hey, I promised this guy's mom 6 years ago that I was going to look out for him, and I was able to look out for him. He played as an All-American for me. He finished college, got his degree, and I had a position opening that his degree matched, and I was able to hire him. And I was almost like, all right, mom, I can go back and look you in the face and say I took care of your son because I got him set up. Right now, from here, he's got to do it, and I'll be able to help. Yeah. And even at the pro level too, you're getting, the level I coach is really minor league professional football, right? So you're getting all these guys in. They're coming from all over the country, just out of college, overlooked the NFL, didn't make it in the NFL, right? Looking for that other opportunity. And again, you're there to help them grow as people as much as you are football players, and get them in the right position and get them opportunity, get them filmed to try to get looked at by the NFL or the CFL, right? But again, they're away from home. They're spending all this time with the coaches and players. You have an inherent responsibility. And, one thing to think about when you're looking at, I coached in the indoor football league in the IFL the last couple of years with Green Bay. The amount of minority head coaches there is fantastic, right? If you look at the percentage-wise, there's more minority head coaches than there are white head coaches in that league. So I coached under Corey Roberson, awesome coach, and Dixie Wooten, and there's a whole load of coaches in that league. So that league and the other major professional indoor league in the country is the National Arena League. Both of those really well represented as far as minority head coaches.
Yeah, I think you hit on it perfectly. In order for there to be real long-term change, there's going to have to be some initiatives around what are we really doing to sort of enact the new way of thinking. And I think the NFL is definitely on the right path for that. I think the NCAA has some work to do. We are Double Coverage Radio. I am Travis Pipes. He is Dave Mogensen. Dave, it's been great to talk a little bit about some of the social issues, not just facing football, but facing the world we live in, because football, as you heard me say regularly, is a part of the sports world, and the sports, I believe, are the common denominator among people, among men, women, and children. And to me, it's important that we face some of those things if we're going to overcome them. So for more coverage from football, from the preps to the pros, check us out on the World Wide Web at www.doublecoverageradio.com. We're on the Twitter, we are on Instagram, and we are on Facebook. We will check you back this week with some updates on other football coaching updates and our Chalk Talk series, which will be coming back to you next week. For everyone at Double Coverage Radio, thanks for tuning in, and we will see you next time. And be well and be safe. Dave, thank you very much. Have a great night.